The princess from nowhere, the woman who would become Catherine the Great, was not born in a magnificent Russian palace, nor was she born with a drop of Russian blood in her veins. She was born Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729. The daughter of a minor, impoverished German prince whose primary asset was his family's impeccable lineage, her life was transformed by a twist of dynastic fate. The reigning Empress of Russia, Elizabeth, the formidable daughter of Peter the Great, was childless. She had chosen as her heir her nephew, a deeply strange and unstable young man also named Peter. Now, she needed to find him a suitable German princess to be his wife and produce the next generation of Romanov heirs. The politically insignificant but well-bred Sophie was chosen at the age of 15. The young princess embarked on the long journey to the vast alien and semi-barbaric Russian court. From the moment she arrived, she displayed the intelligence and iron will that would define her life. She understood that her survival depended on her ability to become completely Russian. She threw herself into studying the Russian language, practicing so relentlessly in the cold nights that she contracted pneumonia. She publicly converted from her native Lutheranism to the Russian Orthodox faith, taking the new name Ekaterina, or Catherine. She charmed the formidable Empress Elizabeth and did everything she could to please her bizarre and deeply immature husband, the lonely Grand Duchess. Catherine's marriage to the Grand Duke Peter in 1745 was a disaster from the very beginning. Her husband was a deeply troubled man-child, obsessed with playing with toy soldiers and his beloved Holstein, the small German duchy of his birth. He despised Russia, its people, and its religion, making no secret of his preference for Prussia and its king, Frederick the Great. He was cruel, boorish, and likely impotent for many years, leaving the young Catherine a virgin and a neglected, lonely wife. Trapped in a loveless and humiliating marriage, Catherine found her solace in two things: lovers and books. She discreetly embarked on a series of love affairs, the first of which, with a dashing young courtier named Sergei Saltykov, likely produced her long-awaited son and heir Paul. More importantly, she began a secret and voracious program of self-education. She devoured the works of the great Enlightenment philosophers Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot. She read histories, legal treatises, and political theory. The lonely Grand Duchess was transforming her gilded cage into a university, quietly forging a brilliant political mind and developing a vision of enlightened, rational rule that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic and decadent court around her. She was playing a long, patient game. While her husband alienated everyone with his boorish, pro-Prussian behavior, Catherine carefully cultivated a network of powerful allies. She charmed the military, the court, and the foreign diplomats, presenting herself as a pious, patriotic, and thoroughly Russian alternative to her deeply unpopular husband, the 6-month Tsar. And the coup in January 1762. The Empress Elizabeth died, and Catherine's husband ascended to the throne as Tsar Peter III. His reign was a 6-month train wreck that confirmed everyone's worst fears. One of his first acts was to abruptly pull Russia out of the 7 Years' War and make a fawning peace with his idol, Frederick the Great of Prussia, an act that was seen as a betrayal of Russia's military sacrifices. He alienated the powerful clergy by trying to seize church lands and forcing them to dress like Lutheran pastors. Most dangerously, he deeply offended the elite guards regiments of the army, the traditional kingmakers of the Russian court, by showing open contempt for them while lavishing praise on his own German Holstein guards. Catherine knew her position was perilous. Peter openly threatened to divorce her, disinherit their son, and lock her away in a convent. She realized she had to strike first or be destroyed. Her lover at the time was Gregory Orlov, a charismatic and popular artillery officer in the Guards. Together with Orlov and his 4 powerful brothers, Catherine conspired to overthrow her husband in the early morning of June 28, 1762. The coup was launched. With Peter away at one of his country estates, Gregory Orlov's brother, Alexei, woke Catherine and drove her to the barracks of the Ismailovsky Guards. Dressed in the uniform of an officer, Catherine appealed directly to the soldiers, who enthusiastically proclaimed her their sovereign and empress. Regiment after regiment joined her cause. She marched into St. Petersburg at the head of a loyal army and was declared the sole ruler of Russia at the Kazan Cathedral. Peter III, seeing that the army and the government had completely abandoned him, abdicated without a fight. The German princess, the wife he had scorned, was now the empress of all Russia. Just over a week later, it was announced that Peter III had died in a hemorrhoidal colic. The truth was far darker. He had been murdered, almost certainly strangled, by Alexei Orlov and his co-conspirators. The accidental empress had seized the throne in a brilliant and bloodless coup. The enlightened despot Catherine ascended the throne not by right of inheritance, but by an act of raw power. She was a usurper and a foreigner, and she knew her position was initially insecure. Her primary task was to legitimize her rule and prove that she was a more capable and thoroughly Russian ruler than the husband she had overthrown. She did this by embracing the role of the enlightened despot. She began a famous and lengthy correspondence with the great philosophers of the French Enlightenment, particularly Voltaire and Denis Diderot. She presented herself to the Western world as a champion of reason, progress, and reform. She purchased Diderot's entire library when he was in financial trouble, and even invited him to St. Petersburg. This public relations campaign was a stunning success, earning her a reputation as the Semiramis of the North and the most progressive monarch in Europe. Her domestic policies were a complex mixture of genuine reform and pragmatic autocracy. In 1767, she convened a grand legislative commission, an assembly of representatives from all social classes except the serfs, to create a new, modern legal code for Russia. She wrote the nakaz, or instruction, for this assembly, a document filled with high-minded Enlightenment principles on justice, liberty, and the rule of law. However, the commission, paralyzed by internal divisions, failed to produce a new code, and it was eventually disbanded. Catherine's most ambitious legal reform remained a theoretical dream, but the process itself had given her a comprehensive understanding of the vast and complex empire she now ruled. Pugachev rebellion, the greatest challenge to Catherine's reign and a brutal check on her more liberal inclinations, came not from the court, but from the vast, oppressed heartland of her empire. In 1773, a disgruntled Don Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev launched a massive peasant and Cossack rebellion. In a brilliant piece of political theater, Pugachev declared that he was not a rebel, but the miraculously surviving Tsar Peter III, Catherine's murdered husband, come to reclaim his throne and free the serfs from the tyranny of the nobility. Pugachev rebellion was the largest popular uprising in Russian history. It spread like wildfire across the Ural and Volga regions, as tens of thousands of serfs, Cossacks, and ethnic minorities flocked to his banner. They sacked estates, massacred landlords, and captured major towns. For over a year, the rebellion threatened the very foundations of the Russian state. Catherine, terrified by the scale and savagery of the revolt, responded with overwhelming and merciless force. She sent her best generals to crush the uprising. Pugachev was eventually betrayed by his own followers, captured, and brought to Moscow in an iron cage. He was executed by being drawn and quartered in a public square. The rebellion was drowned in blood. The experience had a profound and lasting effect on Catherine. It shattered any romantic notions she may have had about peasant liberation and reinforced her belief that the stability of her empire depended on the absolute power of the autocracy and the unwavering support of the land-owning nobility. Golden Age of the Nobility. After the trauma of the Pugachev Rebellion, Catherine's policies shifted decisively. She abandoned any pretense of liberating the serfs and instead solidified her alliance with the nobility, the class that had put her on the throne and helped her crush the revolt. The Charter to the Nobility in 1785 was a landmark piece of legislation that confirmed and expanded the nobles' absolute power over their land and their serfs. It exempted them from taxation and state service, creating a privileged, westernized upper class that would dominate Russian society for the next century. This period became known as the Golden Age of the Russian nobility. While the serfs were bound ever tighter to the land, Catherine oversaw a great cultural flowering. She was a prodigious patron of the arts and sciences. She founded the Hermitage Museum, beginning with a massive purchase of European paintings. She commissioned magnificent, neoclassical palaces and encouraged the study of Russian history and literature. St. Petersburg was transformed into one of the most brilliant and beautiful capitals in Europe, a glittering symbol of her enlightened and powerful reign. The partitions of Poland and the conquest of Crimea. Catherine's reign was an era of massive territorial expansion, rivaling that of Peter the Great. Her primary focus was on the south and west. Her most famous and successful foreign policy partner was her former lover and great friend, Gregory Potemkin, a brilliant and flamboyant statesman and general. Together, they achieved the long-held Russian dream, the conquest of the Crimea, in a series of successful wars against the Ottoman Empire. Catherine's armies and a newly built Black Sea fleet decisively defeated the Turks. In 1783, she formally annexed the Crimean Peninsula, a move of immense strategic and symbolic importance. It secured a warm-water port for Russia and was celebrated as a great triumph of orthodoxy over Islam. To showcase this new territory, Potemkin famously arranged a grand tour for the Empress, allegedly constructing Potemkin villages' fake, pleasant-looking facades to impress her. Though the reality of his development of the region was substantial. In the West, Catherine, along with the rulers of Prussia and Austria, participated in the cynical and methodical dismemberment of the weak and internally divided Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In a series of 3 partitions in 1772, 1793, and 1795, the once great Polish state was completely wiped off the map, its territories carved up among its powerful neighbors. Through this ruthless act of power politics, Catherine added a vast and populous swath of land, including modern-day Belarus and Ukraine, to her empire. The grandmother of Europe. In her later years, Catherine became a more conservative figure. The French Revolution of 1789 horrified her. She saw the execution of Louis XVI as a terrifying assault on the principle of monarchy and abandoned the liberal ideas she had once championed in her youth. She died of a stroke in 1796. At the age of 67, after a reign of 34 years, she left the throne to her estranged and deeply disliked son, Paul, but her legacy was secure. She had inherited a great power and had transformed it into a true global empire. She had expanded its borders by over 200,000 square miles, adding millions of new subjects. She had modernized its administration, enriched its culture, and firmly established it as a dominant force in the affairs of Europe. The legacy of a German Empress. Catherine the Great's legacy is one of profound contradiction. She was the German princess who became the ultimate Russian patriot. She was the enlightened philosopher who brutally suppressed peasant revolts and tightened the bonds of serfdom. She was a woman of immense intellectual and cultural achievement who ruled as a ruthless and expansionist autocrat. She was one of the most remarkable and successful rulers of her age, a woman who seized a throne through a coup and held it for over 3 decades through a combination of intelligence, charm, and an iron will. She completed the work that Peter the Great had started, solidifying Russia's status as a great European power and leaving behind an empire that was larger, stronger, and more culturally vibrant than the one she had found. She was, in every sense, the true heir to Peter's legacy, and the last of Russia's truly great monarchs.